Have you ever stopped buying a whiskey because it was sourced or thought badly about a sourced whiskey and thought that if it didn't wasn't distilled by that distillery, it wasn't worth buying? Have you ever talked bad about MGP? If so, please stay tuned and we will be discussing the stigma of sourcing. Cheers, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Bourbon and Booze. I'm so glad you're here. It's been a very long week, and I am super glad that we are starting off on a really interesting topic, a topic that I've wanted to talk to about for a long time, and that many people comment about, and it's a discussion in many of the whiskey groups I'm involved with, and that is whiskey sourcing, or the practice of buying whiskey from another distiller and bottling it under another brand's label. And what is the thoughts that people have about that? I believe it's faced a lot of unfair share. Its share of unfair stigma within the whiskey community. Many comments on my own episode of reviews I've done have people saying, "But it's sourced," and "Oh, it's sourced, so it's not worth it." Critics argue that it can mislead consumers about the true origins of the product, and sometimes imply a lack of transparency and authenticity. Some of the common concerns surrounding the whiskey sourcing include misleading marketing. Consumers may be led to believe they are purchasing a product made entirely by the brand on the label, when in fact it's sourced from another distillery. This can create confusion and erode trust between the brand and the consumer. Quality control. Critics argue that brands who source whiskey may not have the same level of control over the production process as those who distill their own spirits. This lack of control could potentially impact the quality and consistency of the final product. And of course, authenticity is a really big issue. There's a perception that whiskey sourced from another distillery lacks the authenticity and unique character that comes from a brand's own distillate process. Some consumers may prefer to support brands that produce their own spirits from start to finish and avoid those that are sourced. There could also be a price disparity. Sourced whiskey often comes at a lower price point compared to craft distilled spirits. This can create a perception that sourced whiskey is of inferior or of less valuable, further perpetuating that stigma. However, it's worth noting that not all sourcing is viewed negatively. In some cases, sourcing allows smaller brands to enter the market more quickly and affordably, providing consumers with a wide variety of options. Additionally, some sourced whiskeys are highly regarded for their quality and flavored profiles, regardless of their origins. Unfortunately, the stigma surrounding whiskey sourcing reflects broader debates within the spirits industry about transparency, authenticity, and the value of craftsmanship. As consumers become more educated about the production process behind their favorite spirits, brands may need to adapt their practices to meet evolving expectations and preferences. I would just like to point out a few examples of sourced whiskeys from various regions that are actually quite desired. So first of all, we have High West whiskey out of Utah. High West is known for sourcing and blending whiskey from various distilleries to create their unique products. For example, the popular Double Rye, which is over on the shelf, combines sourced rye whiskey from NGP Distillery in Indiana with a younger rye whiskey that they distill in-house. What I have here is the High West Bourbon. It's a blend of straight bourbon whiskeys, and it doesn't say where it's sourced, but it says bottled by High West Distillery. So this is completely sourced, might have a blend of their own. Nobody would stop from drinking a High West. Smooth Ambler spirits. Smooth Ambler, Old Scout, is based in West Virginia, is another example of a distillery that sources whiskey for its products. The Old Scout line includes sourced whiskey, bourbon, and rye from undisclosed distilleries, which they then bottle under their own label. Bardstown Bourbon. Everybody loves Bardstown Bourbon. Bardstown Bourbon Company in Kentucky has gained attention for its sourced whiskeys releases as well as its own distillates. They offer various sourced bourbon and whiskey products, often with unique finishes and blends. Bell Mead. I love Bell Mead. I am a huge fan of that distillery in, I believe, Memphis. The Tennessee-based brand sourced bourbon from various distilleries, including MGP, and then blends and finishes the whiskey at their own facility. This offers a range of bourbon expressions, including single barrel releases that are absolutely spectacular. Barrel craft spirits, I can't say much for barrel craft. I've never had barrel craft spirits that I know of, but Barrel is known for sourcing high quality bourbon, rye, and other whiskeys from different distilleries across the United States. They then blend these source spirits to create unique and complex flavor profiles for their own releases. One of my favorite, and you'll find this a lot with scotches, is Compass Box whiskey. While primarily known for their blended Scotch whiskeys, Compass Box also releases sourced whiskeys from other regions. They are transparent about their sourcing and often blend whiskeys from different distilleries to create innovative expressions. Nobody would bat an eye at sourcing in Scotch because it's such a common practice, and Scotch is quite outstanding in my opinion. These are just a few examples that I have. Let's see, we have Millam and Green. Millam and Green sources whiskey from Kentucky, and they will blend it with their own whiskey in most cases. And this is a Texas whiskey. And Millam and Green, run by Heather Green and Marcia Millam, are just absolutely amazing whiskeys, and you definitely have to try. We've already talked about High West. Probably the most famous sourced whiskey that is really sought after is Penelope, which is now owned by MGP. So I guess it's not technically sourced, but was sourced from MGP by Penelope. We're going to skip these two. We have our Compass Box Whistle Pig, one of the most famous whiskeys in the world. Their rye whiskey is actually Canadian whiskey in most cases, and this is bottled in Vermont. You would never know that Whistle Pig was a sourced whiskey, and nobody would ever complain about that, in my opinion, because Whistle Pig is such a outstanding whiskey. Uncle Nearest, out of Tennessee. Uncle Nearest is a great whiskey. This is a 80, the 100 proof, and it is completely sourced, and I don't have a problem with it. And I got many comments on our episode on Uncle Nearest just recently about various things, but some of it was about it being sourced, and I still think that it's worth buying because it's a great whiskey. One of the hottest whiskeys on the market right now is Traveler. Comes out of Buffalo Trace, but Buffalo Trace doesn't make it. It is sourced. It's a most American distilleries or bottlers don't say where their source comes from, but most people can guess if it comes from Indiana, it's MGP. But Traveler is one of the hottest ones on the market, and it is all sourced. Stellum is another one. The Stellum Rye is a great whiskey that is also sourced. And surprisingly not, for a lot of you, Jefferson's Ocean and most of Jefferson's lineup is all sourced whiskey. So it doesn't have to be a negative, in my opinion. And two things stand out to me of why this is so, and that is Prideful Goat 15 year is sourced from Kentucky. And it is bottled here in Texas. And this is a absolutely outstanding 15-year bourbon whiskey that is just amazing. Their 6-year is also just as amazing. And I don't think this runs for about $180. So nobody would ever bat an eye about, oh, it's sourced whiskey, I'm not going to drop that dollar. In fact, if you ever find it for less than $200, you should scoop it up because it's really amazing. And the other one is Rosewood. Rosewood is mainly here in Texas. And you can see an episode with Jason Giles, who is the blender of Rosewood and owns Rosewood. It is one of my top ryes I've ever had in my life. I think it is outstanding, and transparency, I'm a friend of Jason's, but not until after I started enjoying Rosewood. And that's the reason I became friends with him, because this is outstanding also, a sourced whiskey. So if you have issues with a sourced whiskey and you just see something on the shelf and you're thinking about buying it and somebody says, oh, you shouldn't get that, it's sourced, or whatnot. That doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, and you should give it a go because it could be one of the best whiskeys you have ever tried. So look at broadening your personal beliefs about sourced whiskey. I'm really interested in what you think. Leave those comments below. Hopefully, you have some really great bottles of sourced whiskey that I don't have up here that you could share in the comments and share with everybody. I would be happy to hear about that. I have tons of whiskey up here in my bar, about 1,400 bottles, and probably, a third of it or more is sourced whiskey. That's how the little guy gets started. Every little guy gets started by sourcing some whiskey from somewhere, at least in the modern era. Let us know what you think. I would definitely say, even with sourced whiskey, that there is no bad whiskey. There's only good whiskey and great whiskey. And this is Jefferson's Ocean. I'm not a huge fan of the Jefferson's lineup, but I do like this Jefferson's Ocean. It's just a very great bourbon aroma. I love it. It gives me the right kind of notes of sweetness, apples, vanilla, little caramel, and just hints of chocolate and tobacco. So everything I like in a bourbon. Let us know what you think. Make sure you do hit that like and subscribe. It means so much to us. And check out Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And we got coffee coming tomorrow, so make sure you check that out. Remember, there's no bad whiskey. There's only good whiskey and great whiskey. And that's all I have to say, because all whiskey is at least good whiskey. Cheers.